Good morning and welcome to Parent Power Hour, Part 1, New School Year, New Strategies, How to Prepare for the Best Back to School Start. We are very excited to have Ms. Ann Dolin here with us today. Ann is a former public school teacher and author who founded Educational Connections in 1998. The company specializes in helping students build executive function skills and study habits to perform better in school and ultimately in college. She and her team of more than 120 tutors, executive function coaches, college consultants, and parent coaches provide virtual support to families with kindergarten to college age students throughout the country. Ann is the past president of CHAD of Northern Virginia and is an advocate for students with ADHD and other learning differences. She's also the author of the award-winning book, Homework Made Simple: Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework, and her latest book, Getting Past Procrastination: How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. I will turn it out to Ms. Dolan.
Thank you so much, Nadia. It's great to see you today and everyone here at the Parent Resource Center. Welcome, parents. I want to share a lot with you today. So, as we get started, let's talk a little bit about homework because that can throw even the most accomplished student for a loop. And I wanted to talk a lot about homework today because sometimes it is misunderstood, especially when kids have ADHD and learning disabilities. Often, when kids struggle in this domain, even if they don't have a ton of homework, but they're, oops, sorry, I just realized this might not be sharing. Let me start over again. Give me 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right, sorry about that. But today we want to talk a little bit about learning differences in ADHD because for those students, homework can be especially difficult. Even if kids don't have a ton of homework, they just have a little, like some of the parents in the chat referenced, they still have to study and earn good grades, and that is homework as well. Oftentimes, when kids procrastinate, they do things at the last minute, they don't turn their work in on time, and their grades are not consistent with how smart they are. Everybody is frustrated. And so often there's a myth and a stigma around kids with ADHD and learning differences. And they are often mislabeled as being lazy, unmotivated, and flawed. But the truth is, these students do not lack character. They struggle with underdeveloped executive function skills. Now, executive function skills have been really a hot topic in education in the last few years because they're really, really important for school success. They have to do with the brain's ability to stay organized, to know where your materials are, to plan ahead, even if something isn't due the next day, but it's due in a week, how to plan that out and get it done, to prioritize tasks, to know what you should be doing first, second, and third, and to ultimately focus when you do get started and follow through. And when you're done, finishing the assignment and actually turning it in. I've worked with lots of kids over the years that do the homework and don't actually turn it in, or I can't find it when it comes to turning it in. All of those things have to do with executive functions. So when kids struggle, it's not that they don't care. They actually want to do a good job underneath it all. But often they feel stuck, they feel overwhelmed, and they're not always sure where to start. And as a parent, when you see your otherwise very smart child struggling in these areas, you are often frustrated, concerned about their future, and sometimes exhausted from being the homework police and poking and prodding and reminding and nagging to make sure your kids get their work done and get good grades. Well, here's the good news. Executive functions can be developed and they can be improved. And this matters obviously not for the student, just for the student to feel more self-confident and ultimately have mastery over their subjects, but it feels great when parents can see their kids thriving in school. I would also argue that it matters for society as a whole. Many of our top leaders now, especially in tech, are neurodivergent and they bring new perspectives that drive innovation. Our goal as parents and educators is to help kids get through school the best we can and the best they can by boosting their executive functions so that later on they have lots of choices in their future, whether it's to go to college and pursue the thing that they love doing and that they're good at, or perhaps it's getting a job or maybe taking a good year, a gap year. But we ultimately want kids to have options. So, how do you build these executive function skills? First of all, it's not through some software program. It's not through a 1 week boot camp class that kids take. It actually happens through their schoolwork. That's where the real magic occurs. And I tell you, we've worked since 1998 with kids all across the country, in private schools, in public schools, in Fairfax County, in Appalachia, various districts, different states. And this method works regardless. The work we do with kids is virtual, and that allows us to see kids more frequently. It helps with compliance and attendance, and ultimately working with kids when we can screen share and co-browse and see their homework portal with them. That's what leads to much better outcomes. So often, as parents, when we see our kids struggling, we say, oh, my kid has to have in-person help, but it's not necessarily true. Maybe when they're really young, kindergarten, first, second grade, but we're really talking about older students today, those with homework. Even virtual can lead to great outcomes for kids. So today I want to show you a little bit about our work, what we do with students, because from that, you will be able to glean some strategies that you can work at home, with your child at home. And then I'm going to go a little bit deeper and talk a little bit more about specific things that work great for all kinds of kids. And then lastly, I want to talk about resistant kids. All right, so let's get going. I mentioned the magic happens when kids learn skills through their homework. So when we work with students, I mentioned our work is virtual. Once we break down barriers and get going, in a session, it generally looks like this. We log into Schoology or whatever their portal is with them, and we say, hey, let's take a look at what you have going on in school. And to the parents that said in the beginning, their child might be in 11th grade and doesn't have any homework, I bet that if I were able to go into that student's portal and take a look with them, they probably do have homework and they definitely have tests that require studying. So we asked the student, okay, let's click on the classes to take a look and open a discussion. So for example, we'll say, let's take a look at your English class. They click on that. And there we're able to see how they're doing in the class. We want to also know how they're feeling about that class. And we want to see, okay, what assignments do you have coming up? Is there anything due tomorrow? Or is there a project or an essay or something else due later on? And then together, we make a list of their assignments in all the classes. We'll then go to the next class, history class, for example. And now we have a list that we've compiled together. Essentially, we want kids to answer two questions. Oh, and by the way, before I get to the two questions, I wanted to mention we want kids to also start with a plan. And so often when kids with ADHD and LD, even if they just have a couple of assignments, they don't really think ahead in terms of, okay, well, what do I actually have to do today? They think they can remember and they'll think to themselves, let's see, I think I have math. I'm just going to start with that. So it's kind of random. It's not really thought well through, and it's definitely not a plan. We want them to have a plan. So by answering these two questions, what do I have and when will that I do it? That informs what their day is going to look like. So what do I have? That's knowing all the assignments that you have, a list. And then when will I do it? Well, that's time on the calendar that they're going to get it done. Somebody at the beginning said that their child is super busy. I think this parent referenced a junior that plays a sport and has lots to do. We see those kids frequently, and they're looking for pockets of time where they can do this work. And so we call these weird windows. That means we'll look at the child's schedule after school and we'll see, oh, wait, you're on the bus going to your lacrosse game. That's a weird window of time, a pocket of time you may not have thought to do something. What could you fit in there? But whether kids are busy or they're not, they should have a general sense of when they're going to do this work. Now, I mentioned resistant kids at the beginning. I have to tell you, this is super common when it comes to homework and studying. And many parents will say, oh, you know what? These ideas sound great, but you don't know my child. He's so resistant. He won't do any of this. He says he doesn't have any homework or not to worry about it at all. But I can share that after 27 years of working with kids with ADHD, and prior to starting Educational Connections, I was a special ed teacher in Fairfax County Public Schools. I completely get it. I understand that kids are resistant. My whole team and I, we specialize in resistant kids because what we often see on the outside, this pushback, this avoidance to do the work, is actually something different on the inside. It's masking anxiety, low confidence, and feeling like they're unprepared. It's almost like kids are wearing a mask, and what we see on the outside is different than what they feel on the inside. So, how do you get through to resistant kids? That's a big question. One of the things that's helpful is to understand a model called the stages of change. And the stages of change is based on the trans theoretical model that tells us that anytime a human being wants to make a change or is thinking about a change or somebody else wants them to make a change, they're in one of five stages. So let's take a look at this continuum. On the far left is a stage called pre-contemplation. That's when the person doesn't even think they have a problem and they definitely have no interest in changing. I wonder if any of you have a kid like that in your house. Maybe not just academics, but you've told them a clean room is important and they really don't care. Or they've procrastinated so long, pretty much on a nightly basis, and you try to get them to start earlier and they don't see an interest in changing. They're at the first pre-contemplation level. But then there's contemplation. And this is when the student thinks they might have an issue. Maybe they'll make a change, but they don't see a big need. Preparation is when they see the need and they've thought of some strategies and they're starting to take a few, to use a few. And then action is when they've got this strategy, they're working through and they're actively using it. And then the last stage is called maintenance. And that's when they've done this over and over. And now it's a new, healthier behavior. So it's important to know to build a new habit or change behavior, there are various levels of motivation in this continuum. And every person comes at a different stage based on a particular skill. Our goal is to help kids move from the left to the right by taking action. So, oh, and by the way, if this is of interest to you and you think understanding this might help your child, I wrote an ebook all about the stages of change and how to talk to kids that are kind of stuck in the pre-contemplation section. And you can get that by going to our website, which is ectutoring.com/BTS, which stands for Back to School dash 2025. And I'll make sure that we put that in the chat too. All right, so let's take a look at an assessment that we do with students to help understand what's going on. We have this two-page assessment that helps us not only to understand which executive function skills the student is struggling with, but I would argue more importantly, how they're feeling about each skill. For example, here's a big one, and it's very, very common for kids to be very resistant about this one, recording their daily assignments. That means that sometimes teachers will post the assignments in Schoology, but not every teacher does that. Sometimes teachers will put it on the whiteboard, or they'll say it out loud, or they'll post it in Google Classroom, or they'll start it in class and it won't be written anywhere. So kids will think, well, I did that in class, but they haven't really finished it and it still is homework. And some kids have a method for compensating. Maybe they go to the portal and they see some, but they have a backup way of recording other things. So we want to know, how do kids feel about this issue? So when it comes to recording daily assignments, when we do this assessment with kids, usually in the first session when we meet them, we'll ask them, okay, here's the first answer. I have my own way of remembering assignments. Even though I may miss some due dates, I don't need a new way of keeping track. I've got it, leave me alone. This kid is in pre-contemplation. Here's the next one. I struggle with this, but it's not a big deal. If I want, I can improve. So this kid's in contemplation. They see the issue. Next one. I struggle with this and I may be interested in learning new strategies. Now you can see the student is moving on the continuum. And the last one, this is difficult for me and I'm completely open. Bring me new strategies. I need some help. So here, if the student picks the first one and they're in pre-contemplation, in our initial sessions, we're not going to go there with kids because they've got their mask on, they've got their guard up, and lots of experience has taught me and our coaches over the years that coming in with a sledgehammer and trying to get kids to do this, although important, it's not going to work. They're going to push back even harder. And our goal, especially initially, is to build trust and rapport. So we'll look for something else that they're willing to let us in, to open the door, if you will. Let's take a look at another question on the survey. This one is a system for planning and managing homework and activities, basically time management. It's interesting because even though parents report that, writing down the homework, and a lot of you said that in the chat as, my child doesn't know what to do. They're missing assignments. If they just had a way of keeping track, life would be better. But kids don't see that as a big issue initially, but they do see this one as a problem. I don't have a system for planning my time, and I don't think I need one. This child doesn't see an issue, but typically kids are in one of these other areas. My system needs improvement, and I'm interested in learning new ways to stay organized and plan my time. And so here we've found that they will often open the door to us because they'll say, I feel overwhelmed. Even when don't have a ton of stuff to do, I can't make myself get going. I would really welcome some strategies. And so this is where we often start with kids. I personally think this method is super helpful because every child has a seat at the table. We're not coming in with, saying, all right, buddy, you need to do this and let's get started and come on, let's go. That approach doesn't work. You may have found this at home that, when you push hard on something and your child's pushing back, and this has resulted in a power struggle over time, your best bet in this cases is to don't go there anymore. Maybe see if there's another way or another area that your child might be willing to accept a little bit of help. So those are the stages of change. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about some strategies to build executive function skills and to get quick wins. Quick wins are our goal, especially initially, when we want students to see progress and to feel good quickly, because that is kind of the momentum that gets them started. It's kind of like riding a bike. When you first get on your bike, you have to push the pedal kind of hard. And then the second rotation, not quite as hard. And the third rotation, now you're getting going. And after 5 or 6 rotations, you're kind of getting going to speed. That's what a quick win is. It's kind of getting over that initial hump and making progress. And that is key for kids, especially early on. And so going back to the issue of managing time and making sure you're getting started on time and getting the work done on time, one strategy that we found to be really helpful for kids is something called rocks, pebbles, and sand. So I want you to imagine that this jar represents all the time your child has in a day. And in it are certain things like rocks. Rocks are must do assignments. This is a visual. So the rocks represent assignments that might be due tomorrow. Or maybe the assignment is really important, like 20% of the student's grade. Pebbles are the assignments that are the should do's. They're due soon. Maybe it's homework that doesn't count for a grade, but in order to really understand it, you kind of have to do it. Those are pebbles. They look like this. And then everything else in the jar is sand. And sand are all the things that kids want to do during the day, like playing video games, watching videos on TikTok, texting with their friends. And what's natural for kids is want to spend most of their day on sand, especially when they get home. And let's say they're playing video games and before they know it, they're in the sand for 3 hours. That's not a great thing because when you put all your sand first, and then maybe you do the thing that you like to do next, maybe you like math, so you'll do your math homework, and then everything else that's a big deal, you don't have time for it late in the day. You've lost energy, it's late at night, and you kind of don't want to do it. However, when we share this visual with kids and we say, hey, what if you flip the process? What if you put the rocks first, the pebbles second, and the sand last? The result is everything fits. You can put everything in your day and you still have your balance preserved. So this visual helps kids to see the big picture of managing their time. The key takeaway is that some sand is important. If we try to take away sand from kids, it doesn't really work because balance matters. So the core teaching and time management and thinking about what you have to do for the day is that for kids to be able to ultimately ask themselves 2 questions, and you can ask your child these 2 questions too. For the student, it's what do I have and when will I do it? Because if you're able to do that, you feel more confident. Your homework feels more doable and it's not so overwhelming. But really, this is the long game. And these skills help kids build lifelong habits, not just getting a good grade on the test the next day or getting a good mark on the report card in chemistry, but really the habits that see them through life. All right, so let's say kids now have a plan. They know what they have to do. They also have to get started and they have to focus. I know a couple people mentioned this when we first got started. We want kids in our work with students to find their focus formula. We want them to think about, well, what might help you with focus? Are you the kind of kid that does well with music? Do you need a quiet space? Do you like to use a checklist for your assignments? Do you like to have a whiteboard at your space? By the way, I'm a huge fan of whiteboards. I think they're great to have in kids' study area because it's kind of like a to-do list that you see all the time and it feels great when you can cross things off. Or are you the kid that benefits from a timer? Maybe you like to set a timer to help yourself get going and to, just say to yourself, I'm going to work for, say, 10 minutes or 25 minutes, and I'm going to get rid of all my distractions. I'm going to X out of every open application. I'm going to put my phone on the other side of the room. Are you that kid? Could those things help you? And then what could hijack? Is it your phone notifications? Is it that TV in the background that you didn't think was a big deal, but then you actually find yourself kind of distracted about it? Is it open chat tabs that are distracting? So these are great questions for kids to be able to talk about and to solve their own problems. To do that, we use a tool called the Focus Finder. And this is in the resources that I mentioned. Again, you can go to our website and get those, ectutoring.com/BTS-2025. And so if you see this Focus Finder, you'll see a bunch of things that we ask the kids. For example, total silence is the first one. Do you like to work in total silence? Is that helpful for you? It's interesting because as adults, we think like, of course, that would be great for kids. But the reality is kids will say like, no, I don't really like that. I like, I'm okay in a place where there's some people mingling around. Actually, sometimes students will say, I like it when I go to Starbucks and I'm working there for, an hour. I actually get a lot done. Or I do best at the kitchen table. It's okay if my mom's cooking dinner and I'm doing my homework. Um, so it really is dependent on the student. But basically, we want to go through each one with them and figure out what helps their focus and what inhibits their focus, and then design their space and when they do homework around what helps them. I'll just mention real quick, music is something we hear from kids. Like they'll say, oh my gosh, I have to have music. But often the music that they're listening to isn't that helpful, especially if it has lyrics and they're listening to the lyrics. There's actually lots of great playlists on Spotify and other places, YouTube, where kids can listen to playlists for students with ADHD. So it's still music, but it's not distracting lyrics that can get them off track. So those are all discussions we have with kids, and you can ask your child many of these same questions, and that feels better to kids than telling them that they just need to focus or they need no distractions. But having a dialogue is super helpful because ultimately we want kids to know their own thinking because that's what builds their skills that last. But it can't be just like, oh, I'm going to do this one day. What we find with kids is it has to be a repetitive process. They have to build it into their daily routine. And that's what really makes change. Because sometimes what works for kids at the beginning of the year doesn't work for kids in November. Kids with ADHD like novelty, so they might have to change it up. But the key is find what works for you, use it regularly, but know that you might have to adapt. All right, this is our student Becca, and Becca is working with her coach. And they're working on looking at all her assignments and figuring out with these assignments what's a rock and what's a pebble. And then going through her day to figure out, okay, when will these get fit in? But the other thing we do with students is we want to pick a rock, sometimes a pebble, but typically a rock. And we want to help them get over that hump of getting started, teach them strategies to get going, and do some of the work with them. So they're also learning strategies while they're getting their work done. When you teach executive function skills in isolation, and kids don't see the payoff, like, oh, wow, this is really helping me study for that science test I want to get a good grade on. They don't always see the benefit. But when they see, like, oh, I'm learning this strategy and I'm getting this done, I'm getting my homework done, or I'm getting my studying done, now they feel like, wow, I've checked a couple of boxes, and they don't feel like they're burdened now with all this additional homework, that they're getting things done in a session. And that's really, really valuable for kids. So I just wanted to touch on what we discussed about kids knowing themselves as a learner. We call this metacognition, and it really, really is the superpower behind motivation. For example, we want kids to know what kind of learner they are because that informs how they're going to study most effectively. We want kids to know what strategies help you learn best. Oftentimes, when kids study for something, they will take their notes, they will take their study guide, and they read it. And they read it again, and they read it some more, and then they announce, I've studied. And then they're surprised when the grade they get on the test isn't too hot. Why is this? Because reading your notes or reading a study guide isn't truly studying. It's actually super passive and not active. But I bet that student does better by quizzing themselves. Maybe they get an extra copy of that study guide that's blank and they ask themselves the questions and fill it in as they go. Anytime you can quiz yourself as a parent, you can quiz your child too. That's super helpful for studying. Maybe the student does great with note cards, old fashioned, but they really work because you're not just visually seeing it, but you're tactily handling it too. And if you talk about it out loud, now it's auditory as well. Some kids do well with this highlighting. We call it red light, green light, yellow light for studying. And that means when they go through their study guide, or their notes or whatever it might be, and they have to know the stuff for a test, they can go through and highlight what they don't know in red. That's something they have to study. What maybe they're a little bit shaky on in yellow, they still need to study that. But what they know can be green. And they don't need to study that because they already know it. So now they have a much smaller window of things to prepare for. Some kids like that highlighting strategy. But basically, knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Perhaps, are you good at memorizing facts, but organizing your ideas? Not so much. Maybe note cards would be beneficial to you. Or how do you prioritize your tasks? Are you the student that likes to do hard things first because you just kind of want to get it out of the way? Or are you the student that's so resistant when it gets to start, it comes to getting started that you'll put it off till late at night? You're the kind of kid that might need to start with something easy first just to get going. But knowing yourself is really the secret to long-term success. All right, so how do you do that as a parent? Well, here are common things we think as a parent. We might say this, oh, why haven't you started your homework yet? Instead, you could ask a question. It's called a powerful question based on curiosity. What might make it easier for you to get started? I'm curious, is some would something make it easier to get going? How about this one? You need to go do your science work right now. It is due tomorrow. Or you could say, what subject do you feel like starting right now? What's the one thing, if you got this one thing done or this one subject done, you would feel great about yourself. It helps kids to start thinking, even though they may not say it out loud. All right, you know what? I really need to start that social studies project. I mean, that's actually a big one. How about this one? I'm so sick of fighting with you over homework. Why can you just not get it done? I mean, your sister comes home and does her homework. Why can't you? And you feel like you're in a power struggle. You could say, you know what? Let's just shift gears. What's your first step in getting started? Like, what's something easy you could do to get going? How about this one? If you don't get your grades up, you're never going to go to college. I mean, you're never even going to get into college. How about reframing it to, I trust you. I know this is difficult, but I have faith that you can start this. I have faith you can get going on this assignment. Let me know if I can help. All of these things get kids in the frame of mind like, I can do this and let me start small, which is an executive function skill. So you can download this conversation guide in the same place on our website I mentioned before. Now, the things I've talked about already kind of assume that the student is okay doing the work, meaning their issue is based with executive functioning. They can do it, but they have a hard time getting started or focusing or knowing what they should do first. But there are also groups of kids that actually do not know how to do the work. They're really struggling in a particular subject. Now, certainly it could be an executive function issue, but if it's not, you have to take action. And you may see this in your child. For example, subjects that kids struggle in a lot are cumulative in nature, where one skill builds upon another. And if you don't have a great foundation, everything else is going to be hard for you and you might feel lost. We see this a lot in math-based sciences as kids get older in high school, like chemistry and physics, and then in foreign languages like Spanish. And so you may know your child struggles in math, and this has been a chronic problem. I will say it's probably not going to go away this year. That if you see your child having a hard time again, you want to take action. You want to intervene early in the school year. So if you see your child come home, they're starting their math homework as an example, and they're stuck, you could say, are there notes about this type of problem? Did your teacher put the PowerPoint up on Canvas? Is there a way to reference this type of problem so you can see maybe the steps and follow that process? You could encourage your child to email the teacher so they can meet after class. I was talking to Nadia at the Parent Resource Center before we started, and she said a lot of schools have tutoring programs. And that could be great for your child too. So talk to your school, talk to the Parent Resource Center. You could get a professional tutor, which is what we do. We specialize in subjects for kids with ADHD and learning disabilities. But the idea is that many times kids need the content explained in a one-to-one setting. Another way to go about it is to use AI, such as ChatGPT, but in the right way. We know when ChatGPT first came out, kids were using it just to get an answer. Or when they were writing an essay, they would ask ChatGPT to write it for them and they would copy and paste and turn it in. But now things have evolved, and actually, chat has a new model called study mode for kids. So instead of if the child puts a problem in and says, I don't know how to solve this, the study mode will guide them to the answer instead of giving it to them. So it might say, oh, what have you thought about already? Or what would be the first step? Or show me specifically where you're stuck and let's see if we can solve this together. So study mode can be really, really helpful when kids are struggling in a specific area. So ideally, we want kids to move from resistance to responsibility this school year. Know that lagging executive function skills are not flaws in your child. And when they're resistant and when they put on this mask, it's really code for feeling overwhelmed and underprepared. And by giving your child a seat at the table and having discussions with them, especially when they're older and they have homework, obviously you're not going to have these discussions with a very, very young child because they don't have that cognitive ability. But once they're able to have these discussions, talking to them about how they're feeling and giving them suggestions, that encourages buy-in. And we want kids to take control of their learning and to be independent so they have greater choices in the future. Where to find the tools? Here you go. The Focus Finder, Conversation Starters, and Stages of Change are all in the place I mentioned. All right, so I would love to go to Q&A in just a second. But before we do, I wanted to mention if we can help you in any way this school year, just reach out. Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart and I work closely together in talking to parents to help them understand their child's difficulties and sharing with them how we can support them. And we're happy to talk to you too. You can scan this QR code or just go to our website and you can schedule a time to talk. You can also find tons of free resources on our website and in our blog to support you as well. All right, so Nadia, I'd love to see if parents have a question. And if you haven't written that in the chat, please go ahead and post it in the chat and we'll go to Q&A.